Hey everybody, hi, it's Mick here. Hope you're doing well today. So, we're going to start our discussion on suicide. Now, we're going to cover this in three different sections. I broke it down. Today is sort of the generalities of it, give you some background on it regarding suicide. And then we're going to get into what I term suicide prevention. That's where we're going to describe some of the signs that can be seen or looked at, and then what one can do to help prevent that person from attempting suicide. And the third is what we call suicide intervention. And this is where the person is in those throes of suicide. You know, they call you on the phone. You know, I'm going to kill myself, and those things. You know, I have a plan. I have a gun, or you may come across somebody. You know, I've had that. I've had those phone calls, and uh, you know, it's very difficult to know how to intervene, what to say, what to listen for. So that's how it's broke down. Just the generalities, suicide prevention, some things that a person may be going through, some signs, and what you can do to help alleviate and get them to a certain person, and then the intervention when they are in the throes. Okay. Now, I want to start out by saying that suicide is a paradoxical state. Okay. And what I mean by that is on one hand, humans have this uncanny choice for life. You know, we do what we call self-preservation. Uh, then, you know, they can end it if they want. So it's very paradoxical in that way. You know, we have self-preservation, and then we can, if we choose to, end it. So the discussion, we're going to go through some statistics also in the generality part of it. It'll highlight that statement in that you'll see, you know, we have that self-preservation, and then some will take their lives, okay? Another thing I want to say is suicide is what we consider the most preventable death. Uh, Yet, now having said that, it cannot be stopped if a person is emphatically intent on taking their life. Another thing that you know that I want to mention, and you know this may sound what we call nonsensical, but suicide is you know it's an option for all of us. A person has free will to take their life. Every person, every day, has a choice of suicide. So you know, I'd like you to remember that because you know that's going to come up in the intervention vlog when we start talking about how to intervene as somebody that's in the throes, as a way to intervene, and when someone is in the act of suicide. Okay, uh, that choice. You know what we do with that, just real quick, it popped in my mind. But that choice, you know, of committing suicide does not have to be made. You know, we can it can wait for tomorrow, and then that choice can be made for tomorrow. Just basically ad infinitum. Okay, uh, so in the intervention, you don't have to do it today. You know, that choice is there tomorrow because we always have that choice. Okay, that's sort of how it goes in there, and it's what we call a self. The approach is what we call a self-limiting approach, and you know I'll discuss that in that respect. Going along with that statement, you know there another thing I want to say is there are just as many reasons for suicide as there are suicidal behaviors in individuals. Okay, so there's just as many reasons for suicide as there are suicidal individuals. there's a Buddhist saying uh, that goes like this: everyone is like all others. Okay, everyone is like some others, and everyone is like no others. So hopefully you can see that point in that. Okay. So to help ease the method of discussion here, I want to define the terms of suicide. And you got to leave it up to psychologists to make things more in depth and harder to understand. But I will tell you that there's proof in the pudding, as they say, and there's good reasons for this that we break it down this way because it's a lot more complex than meets the eye. Since when we get through with the definitions, we'll get into some statistics that are out there, and I'm going to have to read those here to you. So uh, in that because I don't really know a whole lot of them. I know some of them, but these statistics that come from the CDC, the NIH, what we call SAMHSA, and other organizations which they track suicide. And these data is as current as I could find, and it encapsulates these recent years of lockdowns and pandemics. So those things are included. Okay. So now it's important to define what suicide is, and I did a really easy sort of definition here. It's basically predetermined intent to kill oneself. Okay, it is a predetermined intent to kill oneself, to take one's own life, whether they do it on purpose or not. So, and I'll explain that later on as we get down. But it's kind of incongruous, whether a person intends to or not. That's an incongruous statement, doesn't fit. And, with that, there are different categories of suicide, which are labeled a purposeful as one or an unintended suicide. Okay, in that. So it may be predetermined, as I said, yet it could be at a conscious state, or it can also be at an unconscious state. Okay, and hopefully I can kind of bring that out and bring it home and explain that to you a little bit. But the first sort of definition I wanted you to know about is what we label as philosophical suicide. Okay, what philosophical suicide is it's a purposeful suicide that hang on, let me take a quick pause here. Okay, sorry. We're talking about philosophical or purposeful suicide. This is where it is, it's approach suicide for the person is approached from a very broad worldview concept, their worldview, how they look at the world. A person, they go through it and they take a look at their life, their self-defined value in life, and their concept of self-meaning. They do this sort of what we would call a look at life as they weigh their options of living or dying. Now, I would tell you that once that person has philosophically decided to kill themselves, that may be a very, very hard obstacle to overcome for someone, especially who wants to intervene to that person who is in the throes of committing suicide, who wants to prevent them, from taking their life. They're intervening. So if they've decided already to do it, it's very difficult to overcome that because they've already reached that conclusion that it's the best thing for themselves. Okay. Another purposeful example of purposeful suicide is, this cult influence that we've seen. It highlights this spiritual actualization, which is an example. They will spiritually actualize themselves, so purposefully they commit suicide. And we've heard that. Another example of purposeful philosophical suicide is what we call a palliative suicide, or people heard of euthanasia, as an example in one's own life in that. But, the fact of the matter is this: I want you to remember this. If a person is adamantly or emphatically disposed to ending their life, there's little to be done to prevent it or to intervene. Now, I don't mean that as a let's just walk away. We can do things to help prolong that decision and eventually get to the point where we need to be. So never give up in that respect. Okay. The second thing here that I wanted to, for a type of suicide that I wanted to define, is what we might call an impulsive suicide, or a spontaneous suicide, I guess, is a good way to describe it, where it's this last minute decision. A lot of times we will see this as being substance induced. Somebody either having taken some substance like drugs or alcohol, or combination of both, where their impulsiveness is heightened and their judgment is reduced. So impulsively they reach this conclusion, spontaneously they reach this conclusion that the act is in order. This act of suicide needs to be done in order to rectify their current situation. Okay. But now there's another example where they may not be under the influence of substance, like drugs or alcohol, and they've done something, egregious in that respect. And what I mean like that is, they've accidentally caused the death of another person. So, at that time, they will take their lives as a penitence or as an act to avoid negative consequences. That you'll see that in Shakespeare's themes a lot. It's a Shakespearean approach, is what we call it, the tragedy of somebody thinking that they need to do that. Another term that we need to define is what we're going to call or label suicidal intent. It's a preparatory phase. This is a state where a plan is made and the means are on hand to complete that suicide. Okay. It's also, in a psychological or mental state, it's this cognitive acceptance to produce one's death either directly by their own hand or by using other sources, other means. It may appear as an accident or an unfortunate occurrence, right? We can think you probably think, okay, suicide by cop is one of them, or maybe a suspicious drowning in that respect. Or I had one that was, they'd put their ladder, metal ladder next to a utility pole, and they were working. So it had to do with insurance things and that nature. So, but people will typically say, they should have known better than that, and it just doesn't sound like something that they would do. So, a lot of things that people, when they die, it may be suicide, but chalked down as an accidental death. Okay. This other term we want to do is what we call a unintentional suicide, or benign suicide. I've heard that term to go along with that. Benign. I don't. For us who are left here, there's nothing benign about somebody taking their life. But an unintentional suicide is where the person, they make this suicide gesture, okay, yet it results in a completed suicide. They really didn't intend to kill themselves, but they do. Some may cut their wrist too deep, not intending to, or think that the amount of drugs that they're taking will not produce death. Yet it happens in that. Okay. Now we have this what we call parasuicidal, and this may be confusing to you, but we have these ways is when we use these terms, and so we know what they means, but they may come up as we go through the preventive part and the intervention part. Okay, so parasuicidal is a term. These are behaviors that are suicidal attempts, but they don't result in death, and sometimes they're seen as failed or half-hearted suicide, but these are in an effort to gain attention or control. What we would say that's a non-suicidal gesture. So, but it's parasuicidal. They never really intended to commit suicide in that respect. Okay. And that. Suicidal ideation is another term. It's a preoccupation of thoughts of killing oneself, and not taking the steps towards suicide. But they begin this procedural journey, and then they start, idealizing the thoughts of death in that respect. So it's sort of this way of thinking and going about it. They haven't made a plan, they haven't the means, but they have this ideation for it. And that's something that we look at when we talk to certain people in counseling and in therapy, okay? The last one I want to cover is what we call a passive suicide. And this may be kind of hard to understand, but these are what we call ambiguous behaviors, which tend to be self-destructive, but not actively so in that respect. And we kind of will categorize this as a subconscious suicidal ideations. I know I'm throwing out terms here. So let me explain. High risk activities, okay? Always driving a motorcycle way, way too fast without a helmet or things like that. Or we can go as far as even, I'm going to give you an example here, is somebody who doesn't take care of themselves to the point of, so they can stay healthy. Now, my father did this. He knew he had a serious heart condition. And even though surgery was available to remove the blockages, he decided not to pursue, and that was at his and his own family's, his family's peril. He didn't change his diet. He didn't change his sedentary lifestyle. He didn't change his smoking habit. So, we may classify, that as this unconscious, suicidal ideation in that respect, okay? So, and as a passive suicide in that. So these are terms that, I kind of wanted you to understand in that you may hear. Also, when we get into preventive, you may hear me say something about self-harm, okay? Self-harms are those acts that one does to intentionally hurt themselves. They either do it physically, emotionally, or psychologically. But, physically it doesn't produce death. And I'm not going to explain to you what emotionally, psychologically, how somebody self-harms. It's just somebody who always seems to be drama driven, okay? And I kind of explained that a little bit in the histrionic portion of personality. But, it doesn't self-harm, it doesn't produce death. But as a mechanism, they use it as a mechanism to control or as a mechanism to ameliorate their anxiety, that they have. So they will cut themselves, they will burn themselves, they'll pull their hair, things of that nature, excessive tattoos, the pain, is a good example too. So that's a self-harm kind of concept, and we've got to look at those. So you'll probably hear that in the preventive portion of it. Okay, I think I've covered pretty much that. I just want to make sure. So with suicide, or those suicidal gestures, parasuicidal, these are three messages. We have three messages, kind of in this very general sense, that are trying to be sent to others. What the person is going through. Okay, they are either it's a message of communication, a message of control, or a message of avoidance. Okay, communication, control, or avoidance. Those are the basic three messages that are sent from the person, what I just described the definitions, going out to others. Or it can be a combination of two or more. It could be a communication avoidance, it could be a control communication. So those are these messages that are being sent out to others. Now, when I'm talking about communication from a suicidal individual, they want to convey to others just how unbearable their psychological pain has become. See, as the conventional methods of communication have become ineffective. This being able to talk with somebody, in a conventional way, it's ineffective. And with that, those threats, those actions, those behaviors of suicide, they can increase. It can be said it's a message of communication interference. Either they're interfering with it or the receiving party is interfering with it. They no longer have this ability to normally communicate. Like I said, it's interfered with. But they will act out as a way of telling others about their suffering. It's been said a person who has the inability, and this goes back to things I learned about children, but I'm talking about adults. The person who has the inability, or for some other reason cannot express themselves verbally to others, they will transfer this emotive pressure, this energy, this emotive pressure into behavioral action. And with children, we call that term it's acting out. The child does not have the ability to communicate. So we'll see that with those in suicidal gestures, parasuicidal, suicidal intent, completed suicide. Okay, whether it's it's purposeful or it's unintended. Okay, so if they can't speak it when it needs to be said, they will act it out in this maladaptive and pathological way. Okay, I don't think anything more on communication. So control, the second one, control. Remember, communication, control, and avoidance are a combination of two or more. So when we get into one of control, okay, and it seems like people get to this point where they say people who attempt it, or gestures, or have ideation and talk about it, they're doing it as a way to control others, to control their own fate. Now they can control their own fate, so it's more than just controlling others. Okay, we think of it as them trying to control others, but it can also be they want to control their fate and how they die. So there's this, of wanting to control others through attempts, threats, or even completion, or even perhaps to seize control when their world, their environment is perceived to be chaotic or unsafe. Okay, they may want to be hospitalized because they need to get away from an unsafe environment, and that. So That's what we look at when we look at the control, one of the general reasons. And we can really get down in the weeds on these, but I'm not going to and look at them. But I just want you to know communication, control, avoidance. And that's our third one is avoidance. So they're trying to avoid something. They are facing something that's very intense. And in their perception, it's just this unalterable pain of a current situation or event. They can't, in any way, they can't fix it. They can't alter it. Okay. And some examples are like, they're living alone after a separation or divorce or death of a loved one, or they could be facing legal or financial hardship. In these cases, suicide is perceived as a way to avoid the fate. Okay. So we're going to switch over now into statistics in that. Okay. So let me get over here to statistics part. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So, these are the current statistics that I could draw from what's been going on up to 2021. And these are obtained from different organizations, like I said, within America that really study them. But one of the things, and I know this is in the United States, one person every 11 minutes commits suicide. Okay, that's staggering. Of course, there's other countries that are higher, but for America, this is, very high. We look at per capita, we compare it to Sweden or Norway or those places or other places in Europe that are advanced. We have a higher incidence of suicide in that. So, and this is in 2021, the year 2021, there were 47,782 people died from suicide. Okay. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. I thought it'd be higher, but it's the 10th leading cause in that respect. Okay. Females will attempt suicide 3 times more than males. So it's a 3-to-1 ratio, right? But here's the kicker. Males will complete the suicide 3.5 times higher than females. And, this is due to the choice, the means of lethality. Men choose things such as firearms, hangings, and other behaviors that they are sure will result in death. Whereas females, they will typically use these longer outcomes producing death, such as things like taking toxic substances, like medications, using carbon monoxide poisoning, cutting the wrist, where there's a chance of interruption or the chance of failure is greater. Now, women who use firearms, it's typically away from the head and chest area, okay? Typically, you will see it in the abdominal region in that area, okay? So very seldom will we see anything around the head or face. Now the chest, for lethality is very prominent with females in that, but we'll see that and it prolongs, okay? Another thing that really struck out to me, and I've remembered this once since I've read it, and it's gone up here recently, and it's disheartening, is our active duty military and the veterans, together as a demographic. It's 23 veterans a day will commit suicide each day combined. Okay, I mean, if you do the math and you multiply that by 365, I came up just a little short of 8,400, a year. So 23 veterans a day will die by suicide. One person every 11 minutes. And so, with the veterans, this gives us as a demographic, when it's compared to the general public, is 21% higher than the general population, in that. Okay. Uh, when a person is discharged from psychiatric care, so they're what we call they're inpatient, the suicide rate is 300 times higher in the first week, but it goes down. It goes down to 200 times higher in the first month, and it remains higher than the general population outcome for the next 90 days. So typically, once a person is discharged from psychiatric care, the window is about 90 days until they reach that statistically equivalent status, of our general population. So for that, and along with that, another statistic that sort of goes with that is that mental illness is the biggest driving factor behind suicide. A lot of people can say, well, I don't know that. I don't know how you would go and somebody who commits suicide that never was in mental health treatment for that. So, but that's what they say. It's mental illness is the biggest driving factor behind suicide, and 90% of completed suicides are carried out with those with one or more mental disorders. Again, I don't know how they would come up with this, but they say namely depression and substance abuse, or alcohol use disorder is depression and substance use. I'm watching out the window because, man, we have got a killer storm coming in here, okay, for that. In my profession, 1 of 4 therapists, 25%, have experienced a client or former client who commits suicide that they find out about. So I'm sure there are a lot who do, complete the suicide, and the therapist or the psychologist or the clinician doesn't find out about it. So it's probably higher than that. But I'm telling you, this is very, very disheartening for us. And we too, we have this trouble understanding, putting meaning to it, even as professionals. And it does. It affects us severely, both psychologically and emotionally. So, we're not somehow anesthetized from reacting. Sometimes we have moderate to severe reactions to a client, these responses, or former clients having committed suicide in that. And many, will seek some sort of consultation or a therapeutic endeavor to come to grips, to come to understand and to process it, okay? So, in that. So I'm going to switch it up here a little bit. And that. 1/3 of the suicides in the United States involve the use of a firearm. And for those of us who are survivors, loved ones, or friends, there's no warning sign for some. But having said that, I will tell you most will display or give warning signs, and that's something that we're going to discuss in the preventive portion of these blogs. And something else I kind of want you to understand, talking, this is contrary to popular belief now. Talking about suicide or asking someone if someone wants to kill themselves does not exacerbate the act. It actually can prevent it if it's done appropriately. So please, there's something I want you to get clear in your minds in this respect. And I want you to know that suicide is not immune to any age, any economic, social, racial, or ethnic boundary, okay? It can occur at any age. Surprisingly, when I was going and researching this, the youngest on record in the U.S. is 5 years old, okay? And the children, their suicides are, it's been on the rise since 1999 and the advent of social media. Also, in another group, men that are 65 and older have a higher risk than any other age group in that. So nobody is immune. I was in a 2-day training seminar on suicide back in, I think it's 2019, and one of the participants, she had experienced 5 of her relatives in her lifetime who committed suicide. So having said that, yes, there are some heredity facets in the act, and we can say heredity, genetics, biology, in that respect. But what occurs, in that family, it leaves an average of 6 bereaved family members, and many friends. So, and of course, family members they're at a higher risk, statistically speaking, and also a suicide by celebrity can spark this temporary spike of contagion, if you will, a copycat spike in suicide. We saw that with Robin Williams, and we recently had Naomi Judd commit suicide. She was older, in that, but I think Robin Williams really caused that spike, if I can remember right. And they said Naomi Judd, she died. They labeled it as a mental illness. She died from a mental illness. So that's pretty much a soft way to announce death by suicide today. And that, okay. All right. For every death, there are 25 attempts. For every person that completes suicide, there have been 25 attempts. Something interesting, that I want you to know is out of 242 people who wake up that day and are planning suicide, only one completes the act. Okay? So that person who wakes up that day who has suicidal intention, only one out of 242 actually complete the act. When I heard that statistic, it resonated with me. It tells me that there are preventive and intervention measures that can be taken to help somebody. There are so many stories. That one about the one guy on the Golden Gate Bridge, he said if one person would just stop and talk to me, he wasn't going to do it. And it was a guy who was panhandling, okay? So there are many ways, and people have stories that this person stopped it, or this situation stopped it. Okay. So this is something that I deal with, that I really look at hard, is the biggest indicator for suicide is previous attempts. It not only increases the likelihood, but the completion of suicide. 4 out of 5 people, that's 80%, who have died by suicide have previous attempts. Now, I know I said earlier that 90%, mental illness is a 90% factor, whereas previous attempts is an 80% indicator. So factors, indicators, okay? To me, 80% indicator is big to me. So somebody who has the means, has a plan, and who has attempted prior really sets off, that red flag, and I've got to really focus on that, okay? And another interesting thing I found about statistics are the months of March, April, and May. They have the highest suicidal rate in America. These months are 46% higher than the remainder of the year, with the Christmas season being below average. Okay. The day of the week, however, the day of the week that the most suicides occur is on a Monday. 1/3 leave notes of some kind. And divorced people are 3 times more likely to commit suicide. 30% of the general population have indicated they have had suicidal thoughts, and 20% have seriously considered suicide. We could say this is endemic to America, and I think it is, because, we're much higher per capita than when we compare it to other industrialized modern countries. But, there are things that we can do to help prevent, intercede, and intervene with those people who are either contemplating or who are in those serious throes of suicide. And I had mentioned to you and I'd stated that, prevention is based upon actions which lead up to that person taking their life. Those warning signs that we can see or hear. In prevention, we're going to discuss those warning signs and, how to put yourself as a help to help that person. And now, interventionist is the way when you're face to face or on the phone with that person who is, they're attempting suicide. And I know that thought can be dauntingly scary. I've been through that. So, and with the intervention, we're going to discuss those techniques that are what we call evidence based. It is a great program that I'm associated with in that. They're the best in what we see today, and along with some other methods. Okay, we said that most people, they have or do display warning signs, but there's a person may not. Okay, some will take their lives impulsively, spontaneously, in response to this severe or sudden stressor, without really pondering it excessively beforehand. So I want to sort of cover what we've been over here real quick. And I apologize, I'm a little better, but there's a lot of statistical notes, and I needed to make sure I got those in the flow. So philosophical suicide is when there's a lot of thought, and individuals may not display an outward sign, or even appear outwardly that they're sad or distraught. They can appear happy and psychologically healthy and well adjusted. Okay, in that respect, when a person, the most dangerous time for us as clinicians is when that person has been depressed and they're no longer in their depression. They may have made that decision. They're more apt to commit suicide when they're out of their depressive episode. So it's not a person who is depressed. They just don't have the energy to do it, believe it or not. It's when they get happier, or even in bipolar, when they get in that manic state. We really got to be careful. I've been asked, what causes suicide? As I mentioned earlier, it's just this multifaceted cause. Those 3 things that they want to send: communication, control, or avoidance, or a combination of more than that. But to define suicide, to break it down in a very simplistic approach, I want to tell you that the key word for me is connection. Connection. It's a lack of connection, healthy connection, connection with the self, connection with the world around us, a healthy connection with others. just because people are around us, around each other, doesn't mean they're connected. Okay. Many lonely people are very social. They're just not connected. So a lack of healthy connection, I think, is what drives mental illness, what drives substance abuse, what drives pathological personality conditions, and psychological disorders. A healthy lack of connection, both inside and outside, in this respect. Okay, and as a Christian counselor, that connection starts with a close and endearing relationship with God through Christ. In that respect, so I'd like you to think of Christ as the one and only cell phone tower, right? In order to truly connect, we first must go through Him. He is the one and only cell phone tower. To truly, honestly connect with others, we must go through Him. Okay, so for that, and I want to end this part one to encourage you to make sure you have the suicide hotline in your phone. Okay, in here, I have both and my phone is low on power. Okay, so I have both the suicide hotline and the poison control center in there. If you're a veteran and you call the suicide hotline, I'll make sure I get it to you next one. And I'm sorry, just press 1 on that, okay? So for that. And, as always, if you need to reach out to me, it's agapecounselor at outlook.com, 256-599-0291, okay? So I hope you got something out of this. It's a very serious subject, and we're going to get into prevention next time. God bless you, and Maranatha.